Okay, so bony fish will regulate their depth in the water. How is that accomplished? Okay, it's a structure called the swim bladder. So what that means then, if that is compressed, what does that mean to you, that swim bladder? What does that do to its buoyancy? Okay, so it increases its buoyancy, so it begins to move down. Okay, then if it inflates its swim bladder, then it's doing, of course, just the opposite, where then it's going to ascend back to the surface. Now, one of the things that could be important for is not just food gathering, but maybe evading predators as well. That's probably more so with that of saltwater fish. And as we move forward, I think this is where we begin, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Because you got to remember, all these animals breathe with gills. Okay, so since that's the way that they do it, it has to be extracted from the water, and that's the reason that these are the type of aquatic respiration is done with that of gills. There are certain animals that are both aquatic and terrestrial, like that of the turtles, which it's not that they have gills, they just have different or type of supportive membranes in their pharynx, if you want, their throat or their pharynx, which actually helps them take water in, or not water, oxygen from the water. Okay. The author talks about this, talking about that of trout. They're not deep water fish because, as you can see, they don't handle their swim bladder the same as other bony fish. They have to come up to the surface and gulp air, just like what you would think. How can I say that? Sometimes if you have some, let's say, it's usually carbon dioxide in your lungs. You need, so you might see someone or someone says, oh man, I got a burp or I got a belch really bad. Sometimes it just will not come out. So one of the things you can do is you can actually, it's not that you're swallowing air, that's just what it looks like. You're putting that oxygen in your lungs, then you eventually expel that, okay? So what these animals are doing is something very similar. So they gulp that air, okay, to help charge their bladder, and that's what allows them to stay closer towards the surface. Because if it's inflated, we've already established that means they're coming up. It's not deflated where it's going down then, okay? So if you're a little more specialized, the gas will originate in the blood rather than going up to the surface and gulping that. Now you might think, well, how can trout get up to the surface? Well, they can still propel their tail to push them up there and then be able to stay, because are fish heavier than water? Yes, just slightly heavier and will sink. So that's why they have to have that swim bladder to help with their buoyancy. Sharks do not have a swim bladder. Okay, so what is it that allows them to not sink? Not just moving forward, that's just part of it. It was one of the things that you would have discovered when you cut open their ventral cavity in front. It was something that was really big inside of there. Okay, and that there's something specific about that liver. We said it might feel greasy or slimy, okay? And that because that compound is called squalene. And squalene is oily in nature, okay? When we say in nature, it just means that's one of its properties, that If it's oily, it's composed of lots of different types of fatty acids. So, if it's fatty acid in nature, you could say it's comprised of oil and fats. What does that mean to you in regards to water when it comes to fats? Is that down it goes or up it goes? Think of what oil does in water. Say that again? Yeah. Yeah. So if the oil floats in water, which it does, that naturally helps that go up in nature. That's sharks now. Okay? That's different than these animals. So that's physiologically speaking, that is a different way of obtaining buoyancy or maintaining it in bony fish as opposed to that of the cartilaginous fish. Okay? So, one, okay, as you can see, it says the gas gland, okay? That's where this gas exchange takes place. The other specialized area is a structure called the retromirable, okay? And we'll make sense of that in just a moment. Okay, what we mean by a counter-current exchange system, I believe the layout of any house is going to be very, very similar, okay? When it gets cold like this, okay, where does cold air tend to come in from the outside, besides the door that gets open and closed, okay? Besides a door, where does cold air tend to come in the most common place, do you think? Say that again. Okay, so this would just be my estimation or an opinion, not that you ask for it, but should or when you get out on your own and you decide, hey, I want to be a property owner, which means I want to own my own house. There probably is no better investment that you can make if you can maintain it, okay? Because property values tend to increase year after year after year. So it's a very good investment if you can do that. Some people will just choose, I'm a renter, okay? So there's also advantages in being a renter. That means you're just paying your rent. You're not responsible for, per se, maintenance on that house. And then you can pick up and move on a moment's notice, okay? That makes maybe renting is going to be a little more conducive. But back to being a property owner. If a lot of cold air comes in from the outside through windows, don't waste money. In other words, spend a little more money on windows, spend a little more money on flooring. Because typically, if you are building a new house, if you put the better windows in the first time, you don't have to take them out and replace them. If you put good flooring down the first time, it's going to last longer. But my point is, with these windows, if they're not very good, where is heat coming from? Yes, it comes from the furnace, but where is the vent for that? More, I would say it's probably how houses are, let's say, engineered. If cold air is coming through the window, like what we have in this classroom, okay, what might you see on the floor then? Say that again. What's coming through that vent though? Okay, from the furnace, okay? Now, typically we say that, and it's true that warm air is going to rise, but if you're in a basement, that heat register is probably up in the ceiling, okay? Because you're not going to put that through the foundation, because you're just going to, there's no way you can keep that air warm to come up from below. It's going to lose the heat to the outside. So in a similar manner, what happens is if you have cold air coming from the outside and you have your heat register beneath the window, okay, it's kind of like they cancel each other out, okay? That heat gets dissipated. So therefore, you're not sitting at home going brr, unless your furnace isn't working, which is rather unfortunate, but that's how and why houses are designed that way. That's how our house is. That's how the house that I lived in Harrisburg and in Hartford, that's how they're designed. And in this case, it's an example of our counter-current exchange system, okay? But in this case, this REIT Mirable, it is a whole cluster of blood vessels, both arteries and veins. So what happens then is which one has the oxygen, arteries or veins? Typically it's going to be the arteries. So what happens is rather than losing some of that oxygen, it gets grabbed by a multitude of other vessels, okay? So you don't lose those gases, especially oxygen, okay? So in this case, you don't lose that internal heat. It's maintained from your furnace. So this is kind of like sometimes some of the things that we learn as far as engineering, Mother Nature already has the answer a lot of times. Just the way the man upstairs, you could say, designed these animals. Okay. So then, what could you conclude? This is, you could say that the gills, because it's richly supplied with blood vessels, but what is directly on top of this lamella? It's a protective structure. It was one of your vocab terms. When you see fish doing this, okay, this plate that moves, that's a protective structure. And that protective structure is directly over top of this. What is that structure called? The what? Well, it might be called a gill plate, but there's a better name for it. Operculum? The operculum, right here. That's right. Okay? And it's just a protective structure that's over the lamella. And the reason that we know this, okay, and we talked about this, why do sharks not have this? They've got gills, but they don't have these or these. When you saw on your specimen, if we said look for these structures, you'd be looking for a long time. Because remember, when sharks are swimming, what is their mouth doing? It's always open because water comes in through their mouth, then out through their gill slits. That's not how bony fish breathe. They can just stay in one location, open up their mouth, close their mouth, operculum opens, water goes through there. Okay? That's a little different in respiration from bony to cartilaginous fish. Okay, we are on 23, is number 24. Yeah, we will get this wrapped up easily. Okay. Okay? Then the reproduction. If an organism is monoecious, like Hydra or different types of cnidarians, okay, that means they've got both male and female sex organs. But in this case, dioecious means, okay, they're in separate individuals. You have male trout, you have female trout, male bass, female bass. And I typically, when it comes to invertebrates, the female is usually larger. That's not the case, it can be, with different types of vertebrates where, for instance, female lions can be sometimes bigger than a juvenile male lion. So it's not always the case in vertebrates, but it can be. Okay, we are on number 25, and finally 26, the last one, and then that would be it. Now, this isn't always the case. Usually when we picture fish, that they're all ovoviviparous. That's not the case. Some species of sharks are actually born alive. Again, it's not always the case. There's always going to be exceptions. And then a third type that we get to later on is called oviparous, which means the placentals. Not that I'm aware. I don't see a book in here. Are you talking anatomy book or? No, like a reading. It probably would have been up here, and I don't remember seeing one after class. Thank you. It grew legs and walked away. I know. Dang it! All right. Okay, this is what we'll do. The rest of the time is yours, all right? Those papers, okay, you probably have them done, but I think they're due tomorrow, yeah? Yep. So get those handed in tomorrow. We'll also review, okay? And I think we're probably right on schedule where we need to be, a part 1 and a part 2. Okay, so the rest of the time is yours. We'll review tomorrow and start looking. I see you got the shark there. Yes. Good idea. So keep looking at those diagrams. Yes? We'll catch up to you next time.